Hi, and welcome to Can You Just Sit With Me? Where I discuss hope in grief, hope in the hard place, and hope during the challenging times of life. I am your host, Natasha Smith. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to author Liz Newman. Liz and I are part of the Her View from Home family of writers, and I'm so super excited for you to hear her story today and just to hear about her book that we'll be chatting about as well. Liz is a poet, blogger, and author of I Look to the Morning Sky, which we will be chatting about today. Liz has a beautiful way with words, one in which you'll find is most comforting, hopeful, and one in which you will feel not so alone in your grief journey. So, hi, Liz, and welcome to Can You Just Sit With Me?
Hi, Natasha. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I am actually in the thick of getting everything ready for my son's third birthday tomorrow.
Wow. Yes, those are all big milestones. Any birthday, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that is fun. So again, I'm excited to have you with us today, with sitting here with me, chatting a little bit about, again, your story and your book. So to get us started, can you just tell us a little bit about your story, and then maybe like just your heart for the book, and then we'll go a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. So, I have been writing. This book is a book of poetry. I've been doing blogging, and that's kind of where our paths crossed with the Her View from Home family. And I've been writing in the online space since about 2016. And in 2021, that's when I lost my dad. And that's when my writing started to turn more toward grief and mental health and faith. And the book was birthed out of that experience. And it's such a God thing. I did not plan on writing this book. It was just something that ended up happening because I needed an outlet. All of these feelings, all of this grief needed somewhere to go. And so I
Mhm.
just started writing the poems in the notes section of my phone, and I just started really collecting them. And it was just about at the year mark where I was like, I have a lot of poems here. Like, I wonder if I could compile this. And I started putting it together into a document and saw that it could really be something. And that's kind of how the book came to be. And I also had the writing prompts in the back that I wanted to be able to encourage people because I saw how much it helped me in that first year. But I think it'll always be something that'll be helpful. But I
Mhm.
wanted to give people a place to start in case they wanted to also explore processing some of their pain and their loss through writing.
Mhm. I love that so much. So many different things there. I'm gonna try not to get ahead of myself because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just so good. Just for one, just the connecting point. Um, it for me, it was a God thing as well. It's like, you know, all this stuff, grief and with no place to go. But as you're kind of saying, and even your book is written, it's really helping others. You know what I mean? It's like it's really turning that pain into purpose. And I hated that phrase so
Mhm.
much. Like, pain into purpose. Oh, I hate it, But it's so true. But it's truth behind it. And it's really like, you know, it like what you've written is helping others.
Thank you.
So it's a beautiful thing in that thing. So, as you mentioned, you wrote this book over the course of the first year
Mhm.
of grief. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm thinking, like you said, you wrote it in like the notes section of your phone. Like, was it just like describe a day maybe, or a time like
Absolutely.
as you what did that process look like?
So at first, and I'm going to be honest, and I think
Yeah,
most writers can connect with this and relate to this, but not everything that I wrote is in this book.
yeah.
Especially in those first couple weeks, like there's just so many things that you're trying to make sense of, and so much that's just in your heart and on your mind. And I think that's why writing became such a therapeutic tool for me, is because sometimes you're not ready to even talk about it with people yet, and page can be that first spot where you feel like, okay, this is a safe space to pour out what's on my heart. So sometimes I would just be having a moment where I couldn't even make sense of what I was feeling. So I just would start writing through some of it, and it brought a groundedness, it brought an awareness, and it just almost brought it into the light. And when we bring things into the light, it's so much easier to face, and we can go from there too about getting further help, from a mental health counselor or from friends or family. But for me, that was just a space to start, a space to begin processing some of the bigger emotions. And I always had my phone on me, so it was just an easy space to start that process.
I love that. Two things that you said: safe space, and then bringing things to the light. Those are two big things that I think is so important and kind of pivotal in this grief journey. Having a safe space to share, even if it is just a white page. So I love that, and I love how, again, you mentioned you incorporated, your the journal prompts into your book.
Mhm.
So I think that connects so well with saying, if you're finding it hard in the throes of grief, and especially in this first year or first weeks or first days, you can have a safe space even by not even searching for the person next to you or whatever. It can
Mhm.
be a page or your
Yes.
phone or your notes on your phone even. So I love that. That's so good. And then the other thing, bringing it to the light. Again, I we were chatting a little bit before we came on, and I was just sharing how the first several years of my grief journey was a pushing to the side and a stuffing my emotions and really just hiding it because I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't know what others would do with it. And so I didn't feel like I had a safe place to share because I felt just alone or not knowing what to do with it, right? And so it's only been in these last few years that I've began that real process of healing and bringing things to the light. So it's so good how you brought that up, because I think that's is so important in our grief journeys, right?
I love how you touched on that even just now, how you were nervous how other people would react to your grief,
Mhm.
because I think that it's scary to share, first of all, and it can be even scarier if someone doesn't receive it in the way that you were hoping for. And grief is hard for the grievers, and it's hard for the friends and family because I've been the person to say the wrong thing, and I know that it's a tough space to navigate, and everyone's a little bit different with what helps them in their grief. So I just love that you touched on that because it is scary, because once you bring it to light to a person, it's hard to tell how they're going to react, and there's so much grace for people on both ends of that, but
Mhm.
it is such a real fear, I think, for people that are grieving and that feel really isolated and alone in their pain.
Mhm. That's so true. Just from having walked that road, right? Um, so what would you say, um, that writing how has writing been, like, part of your healing? I
Mhm.
mean, like, I know you've written a book, and, you write on your blog, and you write for other online publications and things of that sort. So how has writing been kind of a healing avenue for you?
I think for me, writing has helped because it's been something that I've been able to turn to in the very first days and weeks. And it's also something that you can just continue to depend on because every day brings new feelings and emotions. And I'm sure this is the same for you. Grief, even for myself, looks different from day to day. Like I never know what to expect. I never know what might serve as a trigger and something that just takes me right back into that darker space. And it's it's helpful to see kind of where I've been. And writing, you have this whole trail basically of where you've been in your grief journey, and you can see those first moments and the things that you felt, but you can also see some of the writing from when you're a little bit further along. And we know that grief is something that you carry with you your whole life because that love doesn't go away. So the grief never goes away. But I think it's been helpful to be able to see the different pieces of the grief. And that's why I brought it all together. And I wanted people to see these poems at the beginning are going to be a little bit more acute in the grief process, but this is how I felt at that time. And I think it's important to talk about because there's so many of those early emotions that are scary and hard. And it's so helpful, even for me reading other writers' things, to be like, okay, someone else has really felt that way too, and someone else has experienced that too. And just having people come alongside you in that way is just so huge.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Now, with your story, describe the losses or the loss that prompted the book.
Yes. I have had a few losses in my family, but the loss that inspired the book was definitely the loss of my dad. He passed on January 26th of 2021, and we were very, very close. He was my best friend, and I know we kind of talked earlier before this and talked about how it's hard to separate a loss when they're so integral to your day, and my dad was so integral to my day. We would talk every day, and anytime I needed advice, he was my first call. And it's really hard to make sense of that,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have such a deep relationship with someone and then one day you just can't make that call anymore. And that's deeply painful. And it's hard to figure out and make sense of that. And even as believers, it's hard to sit in that because I know that we can grieve with hope and we know that we'll see them again someday, but in the in between, before we get to see them again, we still have to learn to navigate what it looks like to live without them on this side of eternity. And so this book was really birthed out of that loss. And just a lot of the things are things inspired by him. And I wanted people to get a sense of who he was. So there are poems that touch on the man that he was, his humor, his wit, and just a way of carrying his legacy forward and just reaching out to other grievers through that process. And I just wanted it to be something that really felt like I was carrying him with me into the next chapter and also reaching back to kind of put my hand out to other grievers to say, hey, I've been there too. You're definitely not alone and we can travel this space together.
I love that so much. I love it so much. I know when I saw your book and your story that you had lost your dad, and I was like, I want to talk to her. Oh, and I want to read your book. So I got your book, and it is so comforting. And those are the words that I kind of use um, to describe your words and your writing. Like when I just started the podcast, this episode is that I've found it comforting, hopeful, and a feeling of not feeling so alone on the journey. And so that's why I know that those who are listening and who will pick up the book will feel the same. So
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. Um, so in talking about this grief, and especially, because I'm with you in the sense of I love dad, and it's like, again, like you were saying, you talk to him all the time, and I talk to my dad all the time, so I'm like, oh, we're like sisters now because we love it. But it's so hard when you're trying, as you continue to process that, like they're not here, but sometimes it seems like they're here, and it's just really hard. But when we talk about grief, I want to kind of talk about grief and faith and grief and hope. Um, how did you find that challenging, the loss of your dad? How do you find that challenging to your faith?
Loss just completely knocks you off your feet. And
Mhm.
I tried really hard. I had such a good system in place, and I had heard wise advice in the past
Mhm.
about, making those investments into your faith. So I was in the word every morning, and I was really working on that part of my life before I lost my dad. And I know that that was such such a safe space when I did end up losing him, because had I not built up that foundation beforehand, I don't know where I would have been. Because even with that foundation, I try and tell people this all the time, because it was not like I lost him and then I just continued with my Bible in a year plan or my journal. I had a really hard time, and for weeks and maybe even months, the only thing I could do, I could read the Psalms a little bit, and basically I prayed, God, hold on to me here. That's all. That's all that I could do, and but it was enough. And that's what I always try to encourage people with, because it's not going to look the same when you're actively grieving. And in some ways, like, God was the most tender to me and the most merciful and the most loving during that time. Like, I know that he was with me every day and every step of the way. And it reminds me of Psalm 139.
Hmm. Yeah.
Even here, if I go to if I make my bed in the depths, even there, your right hand will hold me. And when we're in the depths, he's there and he's weeping with us. And that was just such a comforting thought. And a story I'd love to share with you is,
Yeah.
it was such a God thing in the way that only a Heavenly Father can pull something like this off. But it was a definite dark night of the soul situation. And I was just sitting in my bedroom and I was so lost. It was in the really early days of grief. And I had this Bible that I used to carry with me from house to house. My husband and I moved a lot because he was in the service for a little while. And this Bible always came with me, and it always ended up on my nightstand, but it wasn't one that I actively used. It was just one that came with me from place to place. And something told me, open that Bible, open that Bible. So I opened it, and on the inside cover, my dad would always write me notes. And anytime he would give me anything, he would write on the inside covers. And he always wrote the most beautiful messages and cards. And so he had written on the inside cover of this Bible, and it was just the first part was just a beautiful love letter. Basically, I love you and I'm so proud of you, and you've brought so much joy to my life. But the very last line was, I hope this helps you on your journey. And I was just, something just, it just took my breath away.
Yeah.
It was exactly what I needed in that moment. And it was like the Heavenly Father was allowing my earthly father to be part of my healing in this dark space. And it just was the biggest gift that I could have ever been given. It was a turning point. And
Yeah.
that's not to say that I was able to, you know, dive deep into the word or do like a deep in-depth Bible study from then on out. But something clicked in that day, and I just knew that he was with me, that my Heavenly Father and my earthly father, it was something that gave me so much strength and so much hope.
Hmm. Oh, that is such a God thing. I love that so much. One thing I love about these type conversations is that the audience has the opportunity to really hear how it really is. You know what I mean? It's not like, because sometimes I feel like a lot of times we either encounter people who they're on the other side of it, or you don't get to hear the raw and realness of it, how even as a believer it can be hard,
Yes.
but how but it's something special about with us as believers, that we can just describe how hard and how treacherous and how just overwhelming it can feel sometimes, but we feel God. Like, we feel him, like you said, being tender with us. We feel him just being with us during that time, even though it hurts. It's hard to describe, but it's a sense of, I don't know, like, hope. We have a sense of hope, like he'll do something, like like as you described, like a God moment where there's a glimpse of, you know, him allowing you to have that sense from your earthly father to say, I hope this helps you along your journey. That is crazy. You know what I mean? That's so like, that can only be done by our God, our heavenly father, just how he loves us so much, and he cares so much for us,
Mhm.
that he's always lovingly doing things to help us along this life's journey. And that's one thing I want people to know that how the Bible says, there be no more tears, there be no more death, and that's heaven, but we can have hope now.
Yes.
And so I think that's a really big thing, because I feel like a lot of people, the saying that time heals. I can't remember what quote it was, but someone was mentioning how I've heard about how time heals, but what do I do right now?
Yeah.
Like, I'm hurting now. What do I do now? So, as a believer, it's like, God helps us in the moments where we feel like there's no hope, because He is our hope for now, you know? Oh, so, um, one thing that you mentioned that was so spot on, because I had written it down. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good." You had mentioned, like, in the throes of it, where, like, you can read a little bit, like, of the Psalms and stuff like that, because, of course, they're so encouraging. I love the Book of Psalms, and I love 139, because that's, like, a go-to for
Me
me.
too.
But, I had written it down from, the Loss of Words, your Loss of Words poem, that actually says, like, the 6-word prayer that you had just mentioned, that, God, hold on to me here. And I'm like, that can be like the griever's prayer. It's just so perfect. God, hold on to me here, when outside of just saying Jesus, because that can be a prayer as well. But
Absolutely.
I love this 6-word prayer. This can be kind of coined as the griever's prayer, because, God, hold on to me here. I love that so much.
Thank you.
And then there's another poem that kind of caught my attention, called Lonely. And that's on page 55, where, because I just believe how everyone who is experiencing some type of grief, they have, like, that sense of loneliness. And I say loneliness, meaning, you can be surrounded by people, especially when the onset of loss is here and people are visiting and people are calling, people are texting, but they don't, it's like they can't understand, though, the depth of what you're feeling. And even as the griever, sometimes we don't know how to express it. We don't even know how to tell you how we're feeling. So it's like, so I love the words that you expressed in that one. Just And I think that's the thing to take away from this, for those of you who are listening, is how your words really do kind of, express what other people are feeling. And
Thank you.
so it's kind of like, they can pick up your book and say, "Hey, look, turn to page 35. This is what I'm feeling." Because I can't put it into words, but she's put it into words for me. So what ways have you found, for yourself, like, personally, in helping you to not feel so alone?
I think that that's another gift that is given when you're a writer, especially in the online space. Like, I know that there's a lot about social media that's not so pretty, but it's also connected me to so many people. And there are some days where I just need to talk to someone that's going to get it, and our losses are all very personal to ourselves. But when someone's felt that depth of pain and grief, there's just like an immediate connection. And it just makes you feel so seen in that moment. And it's been so helpful to have people that I can talk to, and people that have been able to tell me how my words have helped them. That's such a comfort and such a gift to me too. And it's just been so nice to have that online space to talk to other grievers. And that's been something that's been really comforting for me personally, is just to connect with other people that understand and that grieve as well.
Mm-hmm. And I totally kind of echo that as well. Again, up until 2020, really, I had, a writer, well, a great writer friend now, but she had reached out to me just on Instagram. It's like, "Oh, I think you'd be really interested in joining this group." But it was like a Christian writers group. And then from there, kind of, got into Her View from, writing. And, but it has just been the hugest blessing not of my life, because I have kids and a husband.
They're defaults though. Like,
Yes,
everybody
okay,
knows. You mean
you
those
got
two.
it. you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's been such a huge blessing though, because it's like, okay, people who get me, yay, and just again, just the grief writers, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm just grateful to be able to connect with you and others who get it and understand. So it's been such a huge blessing to me as well.
I
So
think
I know you had were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to mention that I think that it's just such a need, and
Yeah.
so many people are grieving and hurting, but we kind of talked about it earlier. Like, people don't always talk about it, and it's something that virtually everyone experiences to one degree or another, but it's almost like the elephant in the room sometimes. So to find like groups, like the grief writers groups or books or resources or people that are just willing to open up and talk about that, it's just so huge and so helpful, especially in the Christian space, because we need to be able to be in the in between and feel those things and also encourage each other to grieve with hope. But to find safe spaces to talk about all those things is just so important.
That's so good. It made me think of what do you think of like what do you think is the why behind like still people not really wanting to talk about it? Talk about grief.
That's a good question. I think it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to sit in the grief, and a lot of people I think aren't comfortable having questions or doubts or being angry with God. And
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
sometimes I think people will almost fast forward to, well, they're in a better place now, or you'll see them again soon. And there's a lot of biblical truths that are true, but it also needs to be in the right time. You need to talk about it in the right time, in the right context, in the right way.
Yes. Mhm.
Like, a newly grieving person needs time to weep. And Jesus wept. He
Yeah.
sat with his friends and he wept. And Job's friends, before they ultimately gave really unnecessary advice, they sat with him at first too. And I think that people just don't know what to do with grief,
Mhm.
including the grievers. Sometimes it's hard. And I think because we're so hardwired to know that this isn't right. Like, we're not supposed to lose people
Yeah.
like this, and we're not supposed to have this heartbreak and this experience. And it's because we're meant for eternity. And so we're always going to kind of groan and feel that really deep anguish on this side of eternity, because we know that this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Mhm. Perfect. I love it. Yep. Exactly, exactly. That's so good. And I think almost that like people like you and I and other grief writers and professionals, I believe that we're kind of charged or called to help others to make or just make others aware of some of the things that you just mentioned, that yeah, it's hard because it wasn't supposed to be this way,
Mhm.
or just bringing awareness or educating them others on um, that how it's okay to talk about it, how it's okay to still share your loved ones and leaving
Yes.
legacy, because
Mhm.
again, that's I mean that we probably can talk another 30 minutes just on that alone, how there it's just a tension there when people I know people want to still talk about their loved ones who are no longer here, but it's like, can I, should I,
Yeah.
so it's just a lot, but I really feel like what you're doing and what others are doing in this space will really help others to heal because we're bringing things to light and we're talking more, so
And
yeah.
you just hit the nail on the head. Like, grief is full of these challenging situations and living in the tension, and even like amongst yourself in your own grief journey. Like, I don't know if you've ever had this, but I'd have a good day and I'd feel guilty. Like, I'd feel like I shouldn't be happy. Like, this is not okay. This really big thing still happened. How am I happy? And it's like learning to live in the tension of these really big, seemingly opposite emotions. And I think as grievers, we're constantly grading ourselves in a lot of ways. Like, I should be like, the shoulds are so awful. I should be further along. I should be this. I should be that. And we hold these expectations for ourselves that are just not fair. They're
Mhm.
not fair at all. And I just think that that's that's something that makes grief harder as well. Just
Yeah.
these expectations that we place at our feet that we're never supposed to meet.
I love that so much, and I almost, like, really had a big laugh out loud because, um, just as recent as, I'm trying to think, my husband and I visited Disney, just the 2 of us, earlier this year, and he captured on video and a picture. So we're at the front of the stage, and all the characters are coming out, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh, this is so great," and I am crying. I start crying. It's because and and so he has a picture of it and everything, and I cannot like, after the show, I can't get myself together. It's like, "What is going on here?" But I am feeling like my sisters, they didn't get a chance to experience this, and I'm so, so happy, but I wanted them to be happy too, like, to have experienced something like that, and it was the most craziest thing, but that's how it is sometimes. It's
Oh, yeah.
like, I was so full with it. It's funny now, but it's like,
I'm
that's
sure it
the
was really hard in the moment.
yeah, it's the craziness of these emotions of grief. It's like, because I love Disney, but
Me too. Me too.
so I'm like at this stage and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm like, oh, this is so good. I got my camera out and recording them or whatever. And I'm flooded with like a type of guilt almost, or I like to call it's survivor's remorse or something, survivor's guilt. It's like, I'm here and I get to experience life to the fullest at times, and they didn't get to experience this and I wish they could experience this and I wish they can be here. So I was flooded with that and I'm just like, oh my gosh, get yourself together. But that's how it is sometimes.
Absolutely. It's hard, and everything that you go through has a potential to trigger grief because
Yeah.
it's something that should have included them. They should have been there. Birthdays, weddings, kids, like all those things you're going to have just that weird combination
Yeah.
of joy and sorrow, and it's hard, and
Yeah.
some days it's a little easier to carry and some days you have to break down.
Yeah.
It's how it is.
Yeah. And then sometimes those times to me, it's just like, really? And so I'll get mad at myself, like, to say, how that happen? It
Mhm.
just catches me so off guard to the point of like, I don't know. So sometimes it still catches me off guard, you know?
I think that's hard too because it can especially happen like at these moments that you wouldn't have expected. Like
Yeah,
you're kind of prepared, for the big holidays or for
exactly. Yeah.
for that kind of stuff, but you're
Mhm.
not prepared for a random Tuesday, like
Right.
for something to happen and just to be reduced to a puddle of tears. Like
Yeah.
those are hard.
Yeah. So anyways, I wanted to share that because I was like, oh yeah, this is an interesting example of that.
Absolutely.
So, let me come back, I guess, to the book for a minute, and then we'll kinda wrap up. What was your favorite do you have, like, a favorite poem or passage from the book?
Let's see. I have a couple favorites,
Mhm.
but which one would I say my favorite be? Okay. So on page 86 is a poem called What Grows in Grief. I'd love to read that one.
Yes, please.
Okay. In the soil of my soul, I feel these rough rains, sadness soaking the ground level of my grieving heart, but I know your resilience is rooted there. In time, your humor will bring a harvest out of the hurt. Your heart and grit grow here. You made sure of it when you were here. You planted it with care with every passing season, intentional and kind, encouraging and strong, your warmth, your legacy taking hold. And I have hope that what you planted will be hopeful, will be faithful, will be beautiful, grown through grief, through the pain your absence brings, and it'll be something you could be proud of.
Mm. That's so beautiful, Liz.
Thank you.
That's so beautiful.
And
Gosh.
actually, it
Mhm.
kind of ties, I just realized this, it actually ties to something. So when he first passed away, I had a group of friends that bought me seeds to plant a tree. And at the time, it it seemed overwhelming because so many things seem overwhelming in those early phases of grief. But I was like, I think I can handle this. So I planted that tree, and it goes back to Psalm 126:5, and I had that written down. Those who sow with tears will reap
Mm,
with songs of joy.
mhm.
And it kind of ties back into the poem too, because I would water this tree, and it just, you're crying, you're in your fresh grief, and you're watering this dirt, this darkness, and you're just like, nothing can grow here. Like, it doesn't seem like this is going to lead to anything. But I remember the first day that I started to see a little bit of green coming up, and it was just such a tangible reminder of grieving with hope to me, and being able to physically do that myself when I was still in such darkness. And I'm just like, I don't see anything changing right now, but I guess I'll water this tree. And I think
That's
that that's what grief is a lot of the days. Like, I don't see anything fruitful right now, but I'm going to water this tree. And
mm,
one day it'll be green, and I'll remember that this was grown. The tree doesn't grow during the happy phases. The tree is growing when you're watering it in those hard seasons,
mhm.
and that you're just consistently continuing to hope even when it's hard. And I think that's what's so special about it, when you finally get to see the fruitfulness after a dark season.
Yes. That's so good. That's so, so good. I love the analogy of the seeds and the planting and the growth, and of course the verse that you mentioned is, we have these lists of, these verses that are so comforting to us, and that's one of mine as well.
No
Um,
surprise it's from the Psalms.
right. Exactly. Um, let's see. So, I guess to kind of wrap things up, what would you like to kind of leave with the listeners today by way of encouragement or, um,
I think I would just say that if you find yourself grieving, that firstly, I'm just so sorry that you're in this space, and it's hard and it's lonely, and it's a lot of emotions. It's a lot of different things. And I just encourage you to allow yourself to feel those things, and allow yourself to have community come alongside you. Because I don't know if this was this way for you, but sometimes when you're not ready to believe or have that faith, you need someone to kind of hold on to it for you until you're ready. And so having people that are going to help you with that faithfulness, and going to encourage you and going to pray for you during the whole journey is so helpful. And just allowing yourself to let grief be what it is every single day. It's going to be different, and there's just so much grace for that. And what we talked about earlier, I would just encourage people that your faith journey might look different after you suffer a loss, but that doesn't mean that it's not just as important, if not more important. And that's not to say that there's a checklist that you have to force yourself to complete during that time. It just means that you're going to meet with God in those moments in ways that are so vulnerable and so tender. And all that's required of you is to call out to Him and let Him be with you and let Him weep with you. You don't have to be in an in depth Bible study if you're not ready, or if you can't. You don't have to have eloquent prayers. It can be help. That's a prayer. Jesus, that's a prayer. And I just think that that is such a space for healing, and such a space to meet with our Creator in such a tender way, where He can just love you and comfort you and weep with you. And I just encourage you that if you can't get yourself to open your Bible, there's lots of other ways to still commune with God, and He will be holding your hand through all of it.
Mhm. That is so beautiful, Liz. So, so beautiful. Um, how can listeners connect with you? What are ways they can connect with you?
Yes, I have a Facebook page, and it's just Liz Newman Writer. And I finally caved and got a TikTok. And I'm not going to lie, it's really fun on there. So if you're on TikTok, it's Liz Newman Writer on there as well, and on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, that's so fun. Well, this has just been an awesome, awesome time. I so enjoyed just chatting with you and
Me
just
too.
sitting with you. So I just thank you again for your time and for sitting with me today, Liz.
Well, I want to thank you as well for what you do. I think that it's incredible holding space for other people, especially when you've experienced such immense grief yourself. So thank you for sitting with me too.
Thanks so much. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks again for joining me, and thanks for listening to Can You Just Sit With Me? If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to come back for my next episode of Can You Just Sit With Me? Until then, this is Natasha Smith, helping you to find hope in grief, hope in the hard place, and hope in the challenging times of life. Be sure to connect with me across social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at I'm Natasha Smith.